My name is Marcus, and I clean floors at the prestigious Meridian Country Club. Every morning at 5 a.m., I push my cart through marble hallways, mopping up remnants of conversations I'm never supposed to hear. The members see me like furniture, present, useful, but utterly invisible. That invisibility was about to become my greatest weapon. It started on a Tuesday when I was buffing floors outside the private dining room. Through the crack in the door, I heard a voice that made my blood run cold. "Daddy, I need you to kill that affordable housing project on Elm Street. It's ruining the neighborhood aesthetic." The voice belonged to Victoria Ashworth, 24 years old, heir to a real estate empire. Her father's response was worse. "Consider it done, sweetheart. I'll have the city council vote it down next week." That housing project wasn't random to me. My sister Elena had been on the waiting list for 3 years, dreaming of a place where she could raise her twin daughters. Victoria continued, "And Daddy, make sure that little community garden gets torn down too. I want to build a spa there instead. The garden where Elena took her girls every Saturday, where Mrs. Chen grew vegetables that fed half the neighborhood, where old Mr. Rodriguez taught kids about planting hope." Instead of bursting through that door, something smarter began forming in my mind. I kept cleaning, kept listening, and started planning. Over the next few days, I paid attention like never before. Victoria came to the club every morning at 9:30, ordered the same skinny vanilla latte, and spent 2 hours conducting what she called business. That business meant destroying lives with casual indifference. She talked about evicting elderly tenants, bribing inspectors, leveraging her father's connections to rezone neighborhoods. "These people just don't understand vision," she told her friend Madison. "Sometimes you have to force progress on them." I discovered Victoria had a particular weakness. She needed to be the smartest person in the room, always. She thrived on outsmarting people, making deals that left others feeling foolish. She never met a challenge she wouldn't accept if it made her look clever. That gave me an audacious idea. What if I could make Victoria Ashworth defeat herself at her own game? My plan started with research. Every evening after work, I went to the public library and learned everything about real estate law, zoning regulations, municipal governance. I studied Victoria's family business through public records. What I found was a pattern of barely legal maneuvers that skirted ethics but never crossed into prosecution territory. But perfect systems have perfect weaknesses, and I found theirs in adverse possession law. It's an old legal principle that says if someone occupies and improves abandoned property for a certain period, they can claim ownership. The occupation has to be open, notorious, and continuous, and the original owner has to fail to take action. 3 properties Victoria wanted to develop had been sitting empty for over a year, technically abandoned. The community garden was built on one of those properties, maintained by volunteers who had no idea they might have a legal claim to it. Knowledge without action is just expensive education. I needed Victoria to trigger her own downfall, and that meant becoming visible to her in exactly the right way. The opportunity came during the club's annual charity auction. Victoria was there wearing a dress that cost more than Elena's annual grocery budget. I waited until she was holding court, then approached with my cleaning cart, deliberately bumping her table just enough to jostle her champagne glass. "Oh, excuse me, miss. I'm so sorry." She looked at me with disdain reserved for insects. "Just be more careful." But I wasn't done. "You know, miss, I couldn't help but overhear you talking about that property on Elm Street. That's my neighborhood." Her eyes lit up with opportunity. She saw a chance to demonstrate superiority to an audience. "Is it now? And what would you know about property development?" This was the moment I'd prepared for. I straightened up, meeting her gaze directly. "Probably not much, miss, but I know that land real well. Been walking past it every day for 5 years. Seems like whoever owns it doesn't much care about it." Victoria's smile turned predatory. "Oh, we care about it plenty. We just have bigger plans than community gardens and low-income housing. You know, miss, my grandmother always said that the smartest person in the room is usually the one who lets everyone else show how smart they are first." Victoria's expression sharpened. She sensed a challenge and couldn't resist. Your grandmother sounds wise. What else did she tell you? She told me that sometimes the best way to win a game is to let the other person think they're already winning. But I suppose that's just folk wisdom. You probably know much better, being in business and all. Victoria's competitive instincts kicked in exactly as I'd hoped. Let me tell you something about business, Marcus. It's not about folk wisdom or community gardens. It's about recognizing opportunity and having the courage to seize it. Like tearing down the garden, I asked? Like investing in real progress instead of settling for temporary fixes, she corrected. That garden sits on prime development land. Everyone except the people who use the garden, I said quietly. Victoria's eyes flashed. Those people will benefit from the economic development. They just don't realize it yet. This was my opening. You know, Miss Victoria, you're clearly much smarter about these things than I am, but I'll bet you anything that the people in my neighborhood are smarter than you think they are. Her friends had gone quiet. Victoria straightened, her competitive nature fully activated. Is that so? My grandmother had another saying. She said the measure of true intelligence isn't how much you know, it's how much you understand about what you don't know. Victoria's laugh was sharp and dismissive. And what exactly do you think I don't know about your neighborhood? I think you don't know that Mrs. Chen, who tends the tomatoes, lost her husband in Vietnam and came here with nothing. I think you don't know that Mr. Rodriguez teaches kids about growing food because he grew up hungry. I think you don't know that every plant in that garden was put there by someone who needed to believe that something beautiful could grow in a hard place. Victoria's expression hardened, but I could see I had her attention. That's very touching, she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. But sentiment doesn't build communities. Investment does, development does, progress does. You're absolutely right, I said, and I meant it, which is why I'd like to make you a wager. The words hung in the air like a challenge flag. Victoria's eyes narrowed with interest and suspicion. What kind of wager? You're clearly more educated than I am, better connected, more experienced in business. But I think the people in my neighborhood are more resourceful than you realize. So here's what I propose. Let's have a contest. You try to develop that property your way, and I'll try to save it my way. We'll see who succeeds. Victoria was intrigued. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, calculating the ways this could benefit her. What are the stakes? If I win, you leave the garden alone and find somewhere else for your spa. If you win, I'll personally apologize to you in front of the entire country club membership, and I'll never speak against any of your developments again. Victoria smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. You're proposing to bet your dignity against my business interests. That hardly seems fair to you. Maybe not, I agreed. But sometimes David has to face Goliath with whatever sling he's got. Victoria extended her manicured hand. Mr. Marcus, you have yourself a deal. 30 days. We'll see who understands this community better. As we shook hands, I felt the weight of what I'd just set in motion. Victoria thought she was about to teach a janitor a lesson. She had no idea I was about to teach her the difference between being smart and being wise. The morning after my wager, I arrived to find Victoria already there, phone pressed to her ear, pacing frantically. Her body language screamed urgency and frustration. What do you mean the permits are delayed? I need those approvals by Friday. She noticed me and lowered her voice, but I'd heard enough. Victoria was discovering that bureaucracy moves at its own pace, especially when you're trying to rush it. While she fought red tape, I implemented a different strategy. My first stop after work was Mrs. Chen's apartment above the flower shop. Over jasmine tea, I explained what I'd overheard, what I'd learned about adverse possession law, and what needed to happen to protect the garden. Mrs. Chen listened with the patience of someone who'd survived much worse than entitled rich girls. You know, she said finally, when I first came to this country, I didn't understand the laws or the system. But I understood that sometimes you have to fight for what matters, even when the fight seems impossible. She walked to her window, looking down at the garden where evening light filtered through tomato plants. "That garden isn't just about vegetables, Marcus. It's about proving that we can make something beautiful together, even when the world tells us we don't deserve beautiful things." Our next stop was Mr. Rodriguez, who lived in a basement apartment he transformed into a workshop where he built furniture for neighbors who couldn't afford to buy new. When I explained the situation, he set down his sandpaper and looked at me with eyes that had seen too much injustice to be surprised by more. "You know what this is really about? This isn't just about a garden. This is about whether people like us get to have a say in what happens to our own neighborhood." Over the next week, I held similar conversations throughout the neighborhood. I talked to Elena, who immediately understood that the affordable housing project was about her daughters having a future. I talked to Mrs. Patterson, the retired librarian who knew more about municipal law than most city council members. I talked to young Jennifer, who worked at the community center and understood that the garden was where kids learned they could plant seeds and watch them grow. What emerged wasn't just agreement to help, but sophisticated understanding of what we were really fighting for. Mrs. Patterson had been quietly documenting the garden's improvements for years, maintaining records that could support an adverse possession claim. Jennifer had data showing how the garden contributed to food security and mental health. Elena had connections with community advocates who had fought similar battles. Meanwhile, Victoria was becoming increasingly visible in her frustration. I watched her animated phone conversations with lawyers and city officials, noticed how her usual composure was cracking under pressure. The problem with being accustomed to getting your way through connections and money is that you never develop patience for situations where those advantages don't immediately work. On Friday morning, I overheard Victoria talking to her father. "The city council is being difficult. They're asking for environmental impact studies and community input sessions." "Since when do they care about community input?" Her father's response was telling. "Since the press started paying attention. You need to be more careful about optics, Victoria. Make this look like it's good for the community." That's when I realized Victoria's fundamental weakness. She understood manipulation, but not legitimacy. She knew how to make things look good to people who already agreed with her, but had no idea how to actually make things good for people who needed them to. Victoria made her first major tactical error the following Monday. She called a community meeting at the country club to present her development plans. The invitation was printed on expensive cardstock and written in condescending language. What Victoria didn't understand was that calling a meeting at the country club was like asking people to come hat in hand to discuss plans for property in their own neighborhood that they'd had no voice in creating. But we decided to go anyway, not because we expected fair treatment, but because it was an opportunity to demonstrate something Victoria needed to see. The night of the meeting, 47 neighbors showed up. We didn't dress up or try to fit in. We came as ourselves, carrying our dignity and determination to be heard. Victoria had prepared a presentation with charts and architectural renderings that made her spa look like a temple to wellness. She spoke for 20 minutes without acknowledging that anyone in the audience might have thoughts, concerns, or questions. When she finally opened the floor for comments, Mrs. Chen stood up first. "Miss Victoria, I want to thank you for inviting us to your club. It's very beautiful here, but I'm wondering if you've ever been to our garden?" Victoria's smile became strained. "I've driven past it, of course." "Driving past and walking through are very different things," Mrs. Chen continued. "When you walk through the garden, you see that Mrs. Patterson grows herbs for her arthritis medicine because she can't afford prescriptions. You see that the Johnson children learn to read using books we keep in the little library box that Mr. Rodriguez built. You see that the compost system filters stormwater runoff that used to flood basement apartments every spring." Victoria's presentation hadn't mentioned any of these functions because she hadn't known they existed. Mrs. Chen wasn't finished. She produced copies of soil tests showing that our composting and organic gardening methods had actually improved the environmental quality of the land. She showed receipts for materials purchased to build infrastructure, work permits for electrical installation, and correspondence with city utilities about water service. "We didn't just use this property," she said. "We improved it, we invested in it, we made it valuable. And we did it openly, with the knowledge and cooperation of city services, for 3 years. The council members were paying attention now, studying the photographs and documents with careful focus. Victoria's lawyer tried to object, arguing that the quality of the improvements was irrelevant to legal ownership. But Mrs. Patterson stood up with her own folder, thick with legal research. Actually, she said with quiet confidence, the quality and duration of improvements is exactly what matters under adverse possession statutes. We've prepared a formal legal claim to this property based on 3 years of open, notorious, continuous, and improving occupation. The folder Mrs. Patterson handed to the council contained comprehensive adverse possession filing that requested formal recognition of community ownership of the property. Victoria's face went white as she realized what was happening. She'd walked into what she thought was a simple administrative hearing and discovered that she was facing a coordinated legal challenge to her family's right to develop the property at all. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. Elena stood up and addressed the council with the poise of someone who'd spent years advocating for housing policy. Council members, I want to talk about the affordable housing project that Miss Victoria's development would displace. She opened a presentation folder and began distributing documents that showed weeks of research. The Elm Street development that Miss Victoria's family wants to block represents 48 units of affordable family housing. The waiting list includes 67 families, most with children, most currently living in substandard conditions or paying more than 50% of their income for rent. Elena's voice carried the weight of personal experience and policy expertise. Miss Victoria's spa will create approximately 12 permanent jobs, mostly minimum wage positions. The affordable housing project will provide stable homes for nearly 200 people, including 87 children. The council members were taking notes now, recognizing sophisticated policy analysis rather than emotional pleading. Elena wasn't done. Furthermore, our research shows that Miss Victoria's family has filed similar emergency development applications in 4 other neighborhoods over the past 2 years. In each case, they claimed community health and safety concerns to bypass normal development review processes. She distributed copies of newspaper articles, city council minutes, and legal filings that documented a pattern of behavior that looked like systematic community manipulation. Victoria was no longer just facing opposition to a single development project. She was facing exposure of a business model based on exploiting legal loopholes and community powerlessness. The council chairman called for a recess, and during the break, I watched Victoria huddled with her lawyers in urgent conversation. Their body language suggested panic and recrimination. When the hearing reconvened, Victoria's lawyer made a motion to withdraw the emergency development application pending further community consultation. It was a face-saving gesture that fooled no one. Victoria had expected easy victory and discovered sophisticated legal and political opposition she wasn't prepared to handle. The council chairman accepted the withdrawal but noted that our adverse possession claim would proceed through normal legal channels and that any future development applications would require comprehensive community impact studies and extensive public input processes. As we filed out of the council chamber, Victoria caught up with me in the hallway. Her composed facade had crumbled, replaced by frustrated anger. "This isn't over," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You think you're so clever, but you have no idea who you're dealing with." I looked at her calmly, feeling the weight of everything our community had accomplished. "Actually, Victoria, I think I understand exactly who I'm dealing with. The question is whether you understand who you've been dealing with." She stared at me, struggling to process that the janitor she'd dismissed had orchestrated her public humiliation. "You're still just a janitor," she said finally. "Yes," I agreed. "I'm a janitor who pays attention, who listens to people, who understands that intelligence and education aren't the same thing. I'm a janitor who's part of a community that you never bothered to understand because you thought wealth made understanding unnecessary." Victoria turned and walked away without another word, her expensive heels echoing in the marble hallway. 2 weeks later, the adverse possession claim was approved, and the community garden officially became community property. Elena's affordable housing project received full approval and broke ground 6 months ahead of schedule. Victoria Spa was eventually built in a different location, where it serves the upscale clientele it was designed for. The country club still employs me to clean their floors, and I still overhear conversations I'm not supposed to hear. But now when I push my cart past tables where wealthy people make plans that affect other people's lives, I'm not just invisible. I'm listening with purpose, understanding with intention, and when necessary, acting with wisdom that my grandmother would be proud of. Victoria learned that games have rules, and that the most dangerous opponent is the one who knows rules you didn't realize existed. I learned that sometimes David doesn't need to slay Goliath. Sometimes he just needs to teach Goliath that there are other ways to measure strength, intelligence, and worth. The garden grows stronger every year, fed by compost made from kitchen scraps and tended by children who are learning that they can plant seeds and watch them become something beautiful and nourishing. That's a lesson worth fighting for. And it's a victory that belongs to everyone who believes communities can defeat the systems that try to defeat them.